there's a lot of negative language that has been targeted towards this space. However, we're still moving forward because there's still value in seeing people and holding them in all of their humanity, regardless of their race, gender identity, creed, socioeconomic status.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
We all know first impressions count. Yet, rather than putting their best foot forward, most big-hearted, well-intended coaches are unknowingly starting their relationships with their prospective Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color clients off on the wrong foot by making statements such as the following. No, 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 no. Where are you from originally? Wow, your English is so good for a Black person. Your skin tone is not dark enough. Are you sure you're from Africa? We have a scholarship program to support people just like you. These subtle yet gut-punching microaggressions can feel like death by 1,000 cuts for a person of color as they are continually reminded they don't belong. That is why I've put together a training called Microaggressions 101, where I help you to understand how to hold safer spaces in your online coaching business that will see you serve a wider and more racially diverse audience. For instant access, head over to anigishuru.com/LT. That's anigishuru.com, GICHURU.com/LT. The LT is for live training, and you can find this link in the show notes. I've just finished recording this episode with Crystal Whiteaker, and you are going to love her. She's just this gentle soul with so much wisdom, particularly when it comes to brave leadership, what brave leadership means, who are the people who are showing up in this brave way and doing the necessary work of inclusion. I love when she spoke about identifying bias and how can you do it in a way that allows you to shift so that you're being more inclusive. She spoke about values alignment, and she unpacked that and shared a little bit, I think 2 out of her 6 aligned values and the process, the framework that she's created around that. You are going to love Crystal. Now, here's a little bit about her. She is an inclusive brand and leadership development consultant and author, of course, of Brave Leadership is a Choice, an inclusive guide to creating belonging. Crystal helps mission-driven brands and leaders create inclusive, human-focused, values-aligned environments. Crystal brings 20 years of practical, creative, relational, process-driven experience across multiple industries. She is a self-described corporate-trained creative hippie and has been honored as the 2024 Empowerment Leader of the Year for BRA Network. And that's a network for women and non-binary leaders. Here is Crystal. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Crystal Whiteaker. Welcome.
Hi, Annie. Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited for us to dive in and talk about brave leadership because I have spoken to a number of different thought leaders who have come on the show, Crystal, but we haven't really talked purely on leadership. And I'd love us to dive into that today. And in particular, centering your book, Brave Leadership is a Choice. I love that title, first and foremost, an inclusive guide to creating belonging. Now, I often tell my clients that when it comes to inclusion work, it is intentional. It's not something that you just go like, oh, I'm a good person, and so it's just going to be automatic. No, you have to make the choice to be inclusive. And so tell me a little bit about how you landed on this title and the guts of the book.
Oh, I love this question. And I do agree with you. It is very intentional. I've even had a client who reflected to me their recognition that inclusion is a verb. It's something that you're always actively doing. And so yeah, I share that sentiment.
So not a state of being, a state of doing.
Yes, very much. And, when I wrote the book and landed on the title, Brave Leadership is a Choice, it it was from the perspective of, to your point, you're always making this choice. Inclusion is always a choice. And I don't think that leadership is real leadership unless it's inclusive. Just by nature of being a true leader, you're inherently inclusive. You're always being mindful. And the bravery piece comes in really because oftentimes the people that are doing this work, whether you are in the DEI space or you're just a leader in an organization, but you are mindful of the people that you have impact and influence over. And you're often disrupting, you're challenging the status quo, you're asking questions, you're saying and doing things that maybe traditional old school leadership might raise an eyebrow at. And
Hmm.
especially nowadays with I'm in the US, so with all of the rhetoric around diversity, equity, and inclusion and the things that are happening in politics, it's extra brave to be in this space and it's extra brave to be kind of continuing down that path of yes, these things are happening. Yes, there's a lot of negative language that has been targeted towards this space. However, we're still moving forward because there's still value in seeing people and holding them in all of their humanity, regardless of their race, gender identity, creed, socioeconomic status. That's brave because a lot of people are having a hard time finding work for speaking
Hmm.
out on
Hmm.
social justice topics at this point.
That is so true. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Doing the right thing, doing something that is helping lift another shouldn't be a bad thing. It shouldn't be looked down upon. Where would you say, from your perspective, Crystal, in terms of brave leadership in America, in the United States, where would you say it falls?
In terms of brave leadership, where it falls, can you give me a little more around this
It
question?
Okay, let me give you a little bit of context. So when you look at different industries, when you look at in like politics, when you look at maybe corporate America, when it comes to brave leadership under the lens of being fully inclusive, where does that fall in terms of, because for me, my experience here, we are not yet there. There aren't many examples of leaders who are leading in a brave way when it comes to being as inclusive as they can to different identities, particularly those who are marginalized. And so I wonder, from your perspective, when it comes to brave leadership in the United States, where do you feel it falls?
I feel it falls on the shoulders of people who are experiencing marginalization. They are from communities that have historically been marginalized and oppressed, and they are continuing to fight for those historically underrepresented and marginalized groups, regardless. You see it in politics with people in really challenging positions where they are persevering and progressing. The resilience of these people to move through their days and continue to fight for the rights of their constituents, just bravely showing up regardless of what their opponents may say about them and the things that they're doing. As far as corporate is concerned, corporations who continue to move forward with their initiatives around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, regardless of pushback, and we see that unfortunately there's such a divide, right? Because there are a lot of corporations in the States that are pulling back their commitments to diversity and inclusion. Even there's a huge organization called SHRM, SHRM, and they are kind of the overarching human resources body for corporate. A lot of HR, it's almost like an association. A lot of HR people get their learning and development through this organization. And they have an annual conference. And earlier this year, during their annual conference, the leader of SHRM stated that they announced that they were going to be removing the equity piece from DEI. They're like, we're just going to go with diversity and inclusion, talking about the divisiveness. But it's, of course, that was met with a lot of backlash from people in the DEI space because you need equity for diversity and inclusion to really work together. There
Yeah.
has to be equity. So people that even push back against these large influential bodies and saying, hey, this is actually going to cause more harm than good. There's so much bravery in that because they're putting their own livelihood in some cases on the line.
Mm, I hear you. I get that. Somebody might be listening going like, how has that shifted so much over the last 4 years from going from the point of we need to hire DEI practitioners, we need to hire DEI experts into our organizations and making room and way for them in a way that hasn't happened in recent history, to the point where now, 4 years later, it is the opposite, doing away with it, not wanting to fund it, not wanting to be associated with it. What has changed? Bring us on that journey.
I'm going to be really blunt and just say bigotry has gotten incredibly loud in the United States over the last handful of years. That's the very short, blunt answer. And there are people who have found a way to craft and weaponize language in a way that gets people riled up and there's a lot of fear mongering around it that creates more divisiveness because DEI is not new. It's not something that was just started in 2020.
No, it's not. It is not.
But there's definitely a lot of fear mongering that is really feeding into people's core beliefs. But what's interesting about that is the folks that are kind of buying into this fear mongering. If you really strip it all back, I think that you will find most folks have a lot of the same desires and core beliefs. I think most folks do care about the well-being of, their neighbors and other people. So that's my kind of long and short answer around that.
Mm. And how did you get here to writing the book? I imagine there would have been different topics you could have written on, but what was the particular reason? There could be many. I'm assuming it's one. There could be many that led you to go like, okay, I'm gonna put pen to paper. I'm gonna put this. I'm gonna share it with the world. Was there a particular thing that happened, or was it something that you've always felt in you? I have a book. I have a book in me, and everything just aligned, and this book was birthed.
I've always had a book in me. I've definitely always had a book in me. I always wanted to write. Years ago, I didn't imagine that I would be writing a book on leadership. And this is what came out. This was born. So I originally, a lot of what I write about in the book was originally inspired by the first online program that I created, which is Empowered Branding. And that was created to help business owners create genuinely inclusive, values aligned brands, making sure that their messaging aligned with their values. And I wanted to make that information more accessible because not everybody has the resources to invest in an online program, right? Or even one-to-one coaching. So writing a book was the next logical piece of that. And that's where that came from. It took me a while to actually get it all out. It was probably about a year and a half of a writing process. But once I started rolling through it, it poured out of me because so much of it is informed by my own lived experience too.
Mm. And such a necessary book to pick up and read. That is something that I am looking forward to diving into and reading and understanding because even before I press record, we were saying how aligned our work is, our language, and, how we communicate the importance and the necessity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm interested to know, Crystal, from your perspective, what are some of the ways to identify biases, and particularly more so on a personal front. Because I always feel that the inner work begins on a personal level. It's so hard to just change things from a systemic perspective. It all begins internally. And we begin to make those little shifts within us and within our small families and communities, and then it begins to spread. And so, what are some of the ways people, particularly white folks, can begin to identify biases? Because it's not something that a lot of white folks may be aware of, because if whiteness is the standard, if whiteness is the norm, they will always default to that. So how are some of the ways they can begin to identify their biases from a personal perspective?
I love this question. So, the way that I work with folks is really centered around values alignment. And I take people through a 6-step process, and I'll share two of those steps here. Step number 3 is root. And this is where I work with folks on core values, really defining their core values beyond surface level, I care about XYZ, whatever their values are. But okay, why do you care about this value? And how is it beneficial to anyone that you engage with? And going further, how are your values represented in the ways that you're working with folks? So, what does it look like? What are your commitments to inclusion? What are your commitments to your community through the lens of your values and how you're working with people? Getting people rooted in their values first. And then the fourth step that comes right behind that is disrupt. And that's where we're starting to examine their biases.
Mhm.
And the way that I guide people is once you're really rooted on the things that you say you value, and then you start examining biases when you recognize that certain beliefs that you have, ideologies or behaviors actually counter the things that you say you value, that's where we're identifying biases. Oh, that's interesting. You feel this way about this person or this group of people, or you have this opinion about this type of media.
Mhm.
Where does that come from? How is that either reflective and in alignment or counter to the things that you say you value? And people, you see light bulbs go off because they're like, oh, that doesn't actually feel good. Let me examine this a little further. And we do this in a few different ways. We look at personal biases. So those are the obvious things related to identity, ideologies around the LGBTQ plus community, BIPOC communities, things of that nature. But then we're also looking on a professional and a community level. So what biases might you hold in relation to the role that you have? What do you think you're doing well? What do you think could be improved? We all have our own perceptions of what we're doing and taking time to examine that. And the same thing with the community spaces we spend our time in. Where are you volunteering? What narratives might you be absorbing? And how are those in alignment or counter to the things you say you value? And that's where people start to realign and get more rooted in actually embodying those values.
Mm, I love that because I feel like I've been coached back. I feel like I'm listening to myself, having a conversation with a client, and that's never happened before. But I feel like, oh my gosh, that is very much a coaching session that I'm having with a client. I I want to push this a little bit further, Crystal, and ask, how do they stay in it? Because this is where the deeper work comes in. It's one thing to identify and to know, okay, that is not in alignment with the values that I'm articulating or the human that I am, and I want to do better. How do folks stay in the work? How do they stay and continue to do better and strengthen their racial, muscles and stamina in this work? Because a lot of times people come, they tick the boxes of doing the work, have a session with you or me, or many sessions, but then because of the kind of world that we live in that is very much dominated by white supremacy, they fall back into their usual way of looking at life, and their perceptions are very much influenced by who they are as a white person. How, and even for us as people of color, we do default to whiteness on a number of different occasions. How do we stay in the work?
I still take it back to values. I have had multiple clients over the last couple of years. They'll send me an email 6 months, a year later. I was having conversations with clients that I worked with 2 years ago, 3 years ago, this summer. Just, hey, how you doing? How are things going? And over, they'll tell me, the way in which I positioned the values for them in connection with their commitments to being inclusive, they always go back to that. They're always coming back to that piece because it's like if they say that they value community and how they're able to tie their value of community to their commitments to inclusion, it keeps them in check. And I even will have clients do, it's a very, very basic piece of homework. Write their values down on a piece of paper or a post-it note and place it on their bathroom mirror or their computer desk and leave it there for a good 6 months, maybe a year, maybe forever. You're constantly being reminded of, oh, these are the values that I have, and this is how I honored them today or this week. This is how I'm making decisions that come back to those values with that inclusive lens. I have found that helping people keep those commitments through the lens of their values is a lot easier for them because then it's not something that they're adding on as oh, this is an extra to do that I need to remember. It's something that's coming from the core of who they are.
That is powerful. And I love that exercise of writing your values down so that they are mirrored back to you. You can see them and you can keep asking yourself that question. How did I show up today? Was I true to those values? That is so powerful. I want us to shift gears now and talk about your other love, which is photography, brand photography, and just seeing you on your socials, on Instagram, just you are a natural behind the camera, just how you position yourself, how you're just setting up everything, and how you make people feel, even just me from watching. I was like, okay. This is, yeah, I could have a photo shoot with Crystal. And you said something about when you describe brand photography, you said something around capturing images that will resonate with a diverse audience. What do you mean by that?
So with that, all of my brand photo clients, even if we don't do one-to-one coaching together, they still get access to my workbook and I have an intake form so that I can understand who they are, what they believe in, and the types of people that they want to draw in before we even get on set to capture their images and really understanding their personality and how we can draw that out in photos. So there are a couple of examples. Let's say, for example, I actually recently worked with a therapist this year who's a white woman, lovely, lovely human. She did not want to have any extra people in her photos. She just wanted them of herself. So making sure that we were capturing her warmth, her approachability, and being mindful of the energy that was portrayed in those images was really important.
Mhm.
In other instances, I will have clients where they do want to have other people in their photos. Most of the time, they will bring in colleagues or clients and we'll have them sit in images. And the clients that I work with, especially on the photo side, they do tend to have a pretty diverse community and network of people that they can reach out to. So showing that, and not from a perspective of, tokenizing their network because they're actively inclusive, but making sure that their imagery reflects the communities and the types of people that they actually work with.
Mm, wow. I haven't had it described like that before. And that is something to note. I have a network of wonderful photographers and I know they're listening to this. So for them understanding how can they take images that, resonate with a diverse audience because we've got to evolve how we do our work so that we are mindful. How inclusive is this? How does somebody perhaps who comes from a marginalized background know or feel that they might be welcome in the space of that, perhaps that therapist's space. How do they know that? And one of the other things that I often say that goes really well with photography is the language that you use. Because for somebody who is not represented or is underserved, one of the things we do really, really well is we spend a lot of time reading. We spend a lot of time reading and trying to ascertain, is this a safe person for me? Will this be a space where I feel like I can be held? And one of the areas that you speak to a fair bit is belonging.
Mhm.
Belonging. And I really want to touch on that before we come to an end. What your what your ideas are around belonging, because I think we all know what belonging means, but I guess in the way we are showing up from a work perspective, from a personal perspective, how can we bring belonging along on the journey?
Yeah. So, my perspective of belonging is that we cannot truly create a sense of belonging for other people, like truly create that sense for others, unless we understand how we can create belonging for ourselves, first and foremost, because belonging comes from within. And once we have that, it's a matter of being consistent in how we're showing up. So, even going back to the photography piece and the messaging, there's four types of messaging that lead to belonging. You have your written, you have your visual, then there's your verbal, and your behavioral. So, let's say I land on your website and I'm reading the language and I'm okay, this language, the words that I'm seeing written here, this resonates with me. And then I'm looking at your visuals. Do your visuals draw me in, or do I feel like maybe this isn't the place for me? And then if I schedule a discovery call with you, when I speak to you and the way that you speak, is it consistent with what is on your website? And then when I actually work with you, are you behaving in a way that was reflective of the way you spoke when we first met? Is it all aligned and connected? Because those are the things that help really cultivate the sense of trust that people need. And trust is huge. It is so necessary when it comes to cultivating belonging.
Ooh, you just hit it. Trust. Trust is at the core of everything because if you do not feel like you can trust, you do not feel that safety, fear is there. And we know how fear has been used to divide people. And so trust is so key. And as I was reflecting, as you were talking about, the four messagings that go with belonging, I was thinking about a conversation that we had in the DMs, me kind of changing up my hair and wanting to wear it more natural and just struggling, number one, to do that because I don't live in a place where that is accessible in terms of the product. It's something that I would have to do myself. And I'm still
Mm.
learning. And you were just so encouraging. And you told me, just take your time. Don't rush the process. But you will get there. And I wonder if you can just share with us, and maybe I need to get somebody who this is their area of expertise, hair, black hair, to talk about that. But how has your journey been? You transitioned from straightening your hair to wearing it curly. How has that been for you? And belonging, how has it made you feel? Because, Crystal, I know when I wore my hair big, I did not feel comfortable. And I was having a conversation with a dear friend who's a white woman, and she's like, Annie, you look amazing. I'm like, I don't feel confident because I feel like it takes up so much space, Crystal. Like it's
Mm.
and I'm already trying to fit in. I'm already trying to like belong, you know what I mean? And so when some other aspect of me that is not the norm, and I predominantly live in a place where there aren't many other folks who are Black, you count them on one hand. And so I just felt so, I lost my confidence and I just like, no. Whereas if I was back in Kenya, back home in Kenya, where I am from originally, I'd be so happy to rock that.
Mhm.
How has your journey been?
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing all of that with me. Can I reflect something to you, or can I reframe something? Because you're talking about, this not feeling like you necessarily belong in Sydney when your hair is big and out and you're just trying to fit in. Fitting in is more of like assimilation, whereas belonging is that authentic piece where we feel bold and confident and just being who we are, and part of how our hair grows out of our head is who we are. So I want to just give you that permission to take up space. Please take up space because you're so intriguing and there's a draw to you that I wouldn't want to see you fit in just for the sake of trying to belong in a space where you actually deserve to stand out because you can do so much for people.
Mm. I'm gonna go back and replay that for myself because and I'm so glad that whoever's listening, this is you're hearing this raw, it's not scripted. This is the real deal that you can be somebody who does this work every single day, that you teach about anti-racism, you teach about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You teach about people being as inclusive as they can, but then yourself be faced with circumstances where you feel like you want to be part of the dominant culture. You want to be part of
Mm.
that dominant narrative. You don't want to stand out or stick out or be out of the norm. And it's a battle. And that is a key example and a key area for me that I am going to be, working towards for as long as it takes. But it is a journey and it's something that, as I said, uncomfortable. But what you've said back to me is just so beautiful. And I will go back and rewind and play that for myself and possibly write it down.
Yeah, write it down, transcribe it. Yeah, my journey, it's been a journey. It took me probably until my early 30s. I think I was 30 or 31 when I stopped flat ironing my hair. And it was partly because I was traveling a lot for work.
Mhm.
And it was kind of a nuisance for me to, being in and out of hotels and, bouncing around different cities with, all of the hair straightening tools, the blow dryer, the straightener, the heat protect. It was just
Yeah.
way too much. So I needed to condense my hair care products. And so I did a big chop, cut my hair as short as it had ever been. And then just for funsies, I dyed it this fuchsia color. It was so much fun. I'll send you a picture. But I did that, and I had never gotten so many compliments on my hair in my life, just being naturally curly. So I just started embracing it. And I will also tell because I'm biracial, my mom's white, so she didn't really, it was always a journey trying to figure out how to deal with my
Yeah.
hair growing up. And it wasn't until I was, let's see, 36, I think. I think 36 or 37, the first time that I ever had box braids in my hair, because
Oh,
it's not something that was ever offered to me growing up.
yeah.
And my partner, who is also biracial, she gave me my first set of box braids and I fell in love with them. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been missing out. So now I'll alternate between my curls and box braids. But
Mhm.
even in that experience, the first time I had box braids, I was visiting my mom in Florida. And it was at the stage of braids. Every Black woman knows what I'm about to say. It was at that stage of braids where it was like, you still want to keep them, but it's like growing out at the
Yeah.
top.
Hmm.
And so you wrap it in a
Yes.
ponytail. And I was also at 37 learning how to wrap my hair for the first time. And I'm standing there with my very sweet white mother. And we're in the mirror and she's pulling up, Pinterest videos and TikTok videos trying to figure out how to learn to wrap my hair. And I just kind of looked at her and I was very exasperated. And I was like, gosh, mom, why couldn't we figure this out when I was a teenager? And she just looked at me and she was like, I'm so sorry, Crystal. I'm like, it's okay. It's just kind of funny that we're having this experience in my 30s. So the hair thing has been a full journey.
Oh my gosh. It sure, oh gosh, it sure has. Because when I think of my one growing up, where we had access to like box braids, as if you're a newborn and they could let you. They could put them on you. Like it starts so early. Going to the salon and getting your hair done started so early for me. And it was just a natural thing. And moving to a country where you either have to do it yourself or find somebody who's comfortable or has some knowledge of being able to do your hair. And also the cost, it is so costly. Because
Mhm.
it's something that is not the norm. It's not a majority of people are not getting the hair done this way. It becomes a very expensive thing to get done. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm so glad that you shared that journey about box braids and wrapping your hair. And it just took me back home straight. I'm in a room with women, wrapping their hair, and it's such a joyous moment. And I was just reminded how I take certain things for granted because I grew up seeing aunties and
Mm.
my mom and just and sisters just getting that and cousins getting that done, and it was just the norm. And so hearing you saying that and your white mom with the Pinterest videos, and I'm like, yeah, I feel it. I feel it. I so feel it.
Yeah. Bless my mother though. She's been on
Absolutely.
the journey with me.
Absolutely. No, bless her in every way. Um, if I ask this question, Crystal, and we're just coming to an end, uh, if fear wasn't a factor in your work, how would you show up?
Oh, if fear wasn't a factor in my work, how would I show up? it's interesting because I feel like I show up pretty authentically in general. I I think it would be in my offers. There is something that has been sitting on my heart, honestly, for quite some time that I've been tooling around with. I would love to do a healing leadership retreat that brings elements of the work that I do directly with clients or even organizations into, 3, 4, maybe 5 day experience where they're getting all of that and incorporating a visual component of photography. So it's like, let's do some deep work together. I'm also yoga teacher certified, so there would be a lot of mindfulness involved. How can we do this work together on a deep, condensed level, right? Because there's something different when you're in person, the amount of transformation that happens.
Yeah.
And by the end, I would want to do portraits for the participants where it's like, okay, let's capture who you are growing into. Like, who is that? What does it look like?
Hmm.
That there's this tangible piece to go with the way that you feel.
Ooh, that sounds powerful. Wow. And you've articulated it, you know what you want to do. You know it. You know it.
I know it. I know it. The fear that keeps me from doing it is that retreats are a big undertaking.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they're a big undertaking, and there honestly is fear of, would people sign up? Because even in the digital space, even in the coaching space, and I know that people across the board doing inclusion and belonging work are having a hard time even getting people to come to, virtual workshops. So putting all of that energy into something in person, that is my fear, is if
Mm.
there's challenge around getting people to sign up for the virtual stuff, will they come to the in-person stuff? Because it's more of a commitment.
It is more of a commitment, but you don't know, Crystal, unless you give it a try.
I know, I know. Yeah, I probably needed to hear you say that.
You wouldn't know because we can keep saying, but I don't know if people are going to take, I don't know if they're going to buy it. I don't know if I can, you don't know unless you give it a try. And maybe start by reaching out to people you already know who this might be a good fit. This might be something that might be of interest to them. Start with that and then see how that goes and see how you feel because you might do it and go like, it's not what I expected it to be. It's not what I anticipated. Or 4 or 5 days, I was exhausted by day two. I felt like I just had to entertain people so much. Yeah, you just don't know until you give it a crack.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I received that.
And so, Crystal, where can people find you and connect with you?
The easiest way is directly on my website. It is crystallily.co, and that's crystalllily.co, and all of the email and social links are there.
Beautiful. And I will pop that in the show notes for you so you can go directly and connect with Crystal. Thank you so much for your time today. I've enjoyed this conversation and thank you so much for saying yes.
Thank you so much for the invitation and the space to chat.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.